Hi, everybody. I thought maybe tonight we would not get into very many heavy things before the weekend, but it looks like most of the questions that I've received are um, focused on the basic construction of an individual with respect to energy. I think that's an important thing to, if you're going to labor on anything, uh, getting an idea of how we function internally and externally and how that affects us might be really important. Um, so here we go. This one is from Sonia Nigam, and maybe I'm just checking to see what I can read here. Sorry, Sonia. She mentions that she's spent some time with her mom and just came back after the last seminar. It was quite an eye-opener about my training to be helpful and how hard it is to help. I couldn't help fast enough. As soon as one thing was done, another appeared. Kind of crazy making creates a hypervigilance of self and others. Absolutely true. That's why we have to back away from the business of needing to help, having to help, but just keeping it in the back of our mind so that we can begin to realize that there's more to this than meets the eye. There are things, she says, that people who are close to me do that I find so annoying. There are incidents when people I don't know very well have offended, I believe, me, it says. And how can one discern when to speak up for yourself and when to remain silent? Or is this the wrong starting point? Is it better to start with an attitude of love people anyway, no matter what, and see where that leads? Here's a dilemma. There isn't a single person on the planet that is willing to allow themselves to ignore themselves in terms of what they believe is right, valid, not right, not valid. And every individual who naturally exists is involved with the construction of a form that we call personality. It's hard to understand that that personality was literally constructed with love. But maybe we could all try and put ourselves in a position of recognizing a couple of things. I know I've said this before. I will say it again because it's so important. Basics are probably the most important things that you can be involved with over and over again. The concept of basics goes something like this. We are energy beings, period. Science has come up with this concept when Einstein set up his energy equals mass times the speed of light squared. This means that energy of any form, be it human, be it animal, be it inert, be it just lying around, any form is energy. So if you can extend that without getting too involved with the physics of it, you begin to realize that there is an intensity. or energy in us that we use to construct a personality. It starts right in the womb, as I've said many times. We're trying to make sense of with a sense-making machine. It's not a machine, it's a form, sense-making form, a perceiving structure that moves within and without and tries to actually make a constructed form that can be usable in the outside world. Well, if we're in the womb, it's not quite there yet. So there's a lot of automatic stuff that goes on. There's a lot of automatic stuff that goes on when you're outside. One construction that makes some sense to me, but maybe you can understand how I'm thinking about this if I use it. We come out of the womb and immediately we send signals to ourselves about the environment. If we feel the slightest bit of pain or annoyance or reactive response internally, then there's some overt or internal response that goes on, and it's constructing as it goes on a kind of form or formula through which you engage with the world. So I think of a kind of a big rattan construct, huge. Well, if you take away the rattan, if you're looking at it from a so-called psychic orientation, you could say colorful engagement with energy. Well, it doesn't make any sense to me, even though in the early days you could see that, and it promotes the personality's ability to be wonderful because they can see all these things. Oh, okay, that's still personality. That's still a rattan. But no, you construct a habitual stiffening response system that is not negative, that is constructed for the purpose to take a measure of the world, the environment around them, and reflexively come up with concepts, ideas, responses, actions, reactions, responses that are comforting to you, you like, some you don't like. So this is what you're measuring all the time. On top of that, we have a great copying system. We have copied anybody and everybody that would help us to make sense of the world. We memorize material in books. We listen to people and speak the same words over and over again that we think are going to work for us. It's part of the rattan form. It's like not a cage. You're not trapped in it, but you're trapped by it, because you validate the habitual responses that you believe make some sense. And some of them really do make sense. So the personality is not negative, but it's a form. It's a usable vehicle. Well, to talk about like that, it makes no sense unless you can really kind of look at it and from a point of view where you can actually consider the possibility that that form was built by you, consciously and unconsciously, you could say, but by the use of intensity or love, from my perspective, that would have you do anything at all with that energy that you believe would be helpful to you in the arrangement that you have constructed based on how you were trained to construct and your own renderings, creativity of some kind, your own versionings of what might be valid or invalid from time to time. And you start responding reflexively because you have been doing it and it made something and it made some sense to you, so you do it again, then you do it again, and then you do it again, and then it becomes reflexive. A very important response to reassert your engagement with the structure or the construction or the zone, in and around zone of how you think things should be. We don't always come face to face with how we have set ourselves in motion, and we don't quite understand at that point, or yet even sometimes, what that looks like until we can allow ourselves not to defend it as much. This is easy to say in words, but very difficult to engage with, as Sonia is saying, because you are looking for the right answer. And I said zone. The right answer, is it like this or is it like that? And ultimately, maybe you do find different answers, but it's got to fit this mold that we've constructed. Well, that's partly true. It doesn't have to fit the mold, but it often, a person who has constructed a form is naturally reflexively responding if something doesn't fit into a mold. And this is either negative mold or positive mold or neutral mold, meaning if someone says something and you're quite invigorated by it, you may not allow yourself to be invigorated by it because that's not allowed in your personality zone. You may have to respond to it somehow until your responses that you hear move in a direction towards making sense of something that they may have said, and then you can respond constructively to what is spoken. There's a whole structure around what you will allow yourself to respond to. I'm talking generally about everybody because this is the most beautiful thing about all of this is if ultimately, initially and ultimately, love of a kind is there, different maybe than our coarser renderings of loving, but our coarser renderings of loving is still love. Even our protective nature is we love ourselves the way we believe we are, and therefore others should comply with those ideas. And if they don't, then we must protect our vulnerability to shift and change that we're not ready to be okay with. Sounds a little strange sometimes, fractured sometimes, makes some sense sometimes. All of those small responses internally are valuable in the movement or the subtle shift of some of the rattan. The rattan it's not iron and steel. It's just strengthened energy by habit. It isn't, when you're looking at internal growth, it isn't about doing everything right. It isn't about getting somebody else to do it right. It's about helping a person understand themselves from a perspective that may be freely accessible in them, which may be different than how one thinks that should be freely acceptable, because it should be quicker as opposed to slower. In the whole process of spiritual growth, there have not been many truly enlightened people. And if you start talking about addressing what enlightened means, it's not about a judgment about how a person should be in relationship to being able to link up with higher states and become a funnel for higher states to engage with these planes through a form that is constructed here, literally, but has positive, not so positive things in them, naturally normal things that relate to these planes in them, and physically, emotionally, and mentally. And at the same time, some of those internal structures can have love flow through them, even let's say if it's considered a negative thing, flows through that negative thing because the individual has considered options different than what originally were there. So therefore, there's an energetic component that has shifted the need to be habitually operating in the same way. Therefore, energy can move through that like a little screen with the catalytic effects of that screen moving towards another who has something similar to what they had, and it touches them energetically, and there's a small little increment of help that goes into them, and immediately the other moves into a self-protective mode. I can't hear, I can't see, I don't understand. And besides, you don't really understand me the way I am, all of that. This is a natural tendency in the process of internal adjustment. And the goal is not perfection. The goal is seeing, understanding, slow incremental movements, leaving a space in that willingness to allow for a perception that relates directly to noticing love. Now, love is at many levels. The old traditional way of looking at love in the West was power. If I have a lot of energy in me, then I am powerful, and that must be God because it must be way up there and it's ultimate and it whoops through me, and therefore I'm great. It's pretty loose. Here's another way to look at it. Love is on a continuum from coarse to the softest, most gentle engagement, almost in our relationship, almost imperceivable by a human sensing system, and actually, up to now, mostly imperceivable. If it was perceived, everyone would say, well, this is what that is, and you'd have a multiplicity of different versions of what that might be, and neither good nor bad, but whoever had the versions would think that theirs was right. This is humanity. There's no negation in that. It's just how we are. It doesn't mean we're right. It just means we're looking at things from where we can look at them. And we always believe that our personalities are the thing that will be ultimately valued for engaging with that fusion of higher state, or God, or whatever you might call it. I call it higher state, I call it God, I call it anything that makes sense to me in the moment, to be honest. But that flow is interesting because there is an honest question that Sonia asks. And that question is really interesting. How can one discern when to speak up for yourself and when to remain silent? Or is this a wrong starting point? Is it better to start with the attitude of love people anyway, no matter what they're like? Might be helpful. And see where that leads? Well, there's an aspect of that. But if you look at an individual, and I don't care who it is, doesn't matter, and you start, let's say, getting to know that person, and you'll find out sometimes you'll really be comfortable with them, and other times you won't be. If anybody who ever dared to have a friend, you will actually find that it's not a dispositional thing, it's a construction thing. And there's all kinds of deep internal engagements going on at the same time. They need validation for how they're doing things. If they don't get it from other people, they'll get it from themselves. This is how we do things. So, unknowingly or knowingly, we have a schema that we set up. How the world should be, how we should be, well, sort of, how others should be. Oh, yeah, much more deserving of our time, but also how we should be as well. But acute attention paid to how others engage with us and make us respond to them. The truth is, others are emanating energy in our direction. We're emanating energy in their direction. They cross over. If we agree, it's like two waves deciding to come and move together. If we don't agree, it's like one saying, I'm going this way and my trough is here and my peak is over here. And when I'm in my peak, you're in your trough. In other words, we can't agree with each other because you're not willing to allow an idea, because we speak with ideas and words, symbols, all kinds of things. And we speak with emotional dispositional responses. Our solar plexus plays a tremendous part in our relationship with others. Our root center plays a tremendous part in the dialogue that is necessary to be acceptable from others to us, and vice versa. Our will decides emotionally or so-called mentally. It's really an aspect of the emotional structure, but nonetheless, we are not very schooled in this territory very much, but our use of thinking is still constructed relating to the personality. Our method of thinking is induced by how we've constructed our personal engagements with life and in this coarser world, and we validate relative to it. If we have beliefs that are different than another, then we are not too really engaging. We can be, but kind of puts us out a little bit. Meaning, makes us think those ideas are not necessarily worthwhile talking about. However, if you're focused on love, I'm going to give a silly definition of love. If you are able to perceive somewhat energy in and around you, I'm going to call it love. Instead of focusing on the assessment of another, focus on listening to how the other expresses and what they're saying, while you attending the best you can to a focus on that energy or that flow that is going on in you, hopefully at that time. Because if you're very strongly reactive, you will not be able to focus on that energy, because your attenuator, your needle, is focused on validating you, your personality. It's relating to a deeper level has never been validating the personality. It's always being pull back, allow your focus to move to that flow, and now listen and see where they're coming from. Oh my goodness, there's something that they're vulnerable about. Oh my goodness, they have a schema. I'm just talking, and the schema means they are here and you are there. Their idea is more important than yours. And to them, right then, it is. Suddenly, you may have a response and you may say, I need to help them come up with an idea that's more relative to me and my idea. This is normal in our world. But you have stopped focusing on that love in you, or not a facsimile of love, not the one where you make up, I am now loving that person, I am now loving that person. You can try that and see if it works. It may work in some cases. But if you are consciously aware of that flow inside of you, focus on it and listen. Use your ears to put your needle on the ears instead of your reaction. Use the ears as a method of making sure you understand where they're coming from. If you do that, the energy moving in from them will be perceived differently in you. You'll know where the center is that they're using. You'll understand they're vulnerable. You'll understand when they are vulnerable, this is not a time for you to help them. Your version of helping may be something that may not be helpful to them. The question would be, how can I help that person? But there may be not an answer that might help them the way you want them to be helped. This is not about the personality's engagement. How can I help them may stimulate an energy to operate through you for the purpose of helping them in the way and in the language that they need to be helped, and that will happen through them, not through you. This is very difficult for us to understand. I've gotten mixed up with this one. I often tell the story about Serge and I and me giving a lecture, and I'm trying to explain something to somebody, and finally I saw Serge go like this. I knew there was another way to explain something, but I couldn't just grab it perfectly for her. I could understand it better myself, but she could not understand this. It was not something for her to understand. She would have to understand that through her, not through my telling in the way that I could, because my words were related to me. It's not so simple when you're engaging, especially with family. Families are really interesting. Remember, there's a deep level loving there, but a powerful expectation. Expectations in families are huge. You should be exactly the way this family should be. And unfortunately, it ends up to be true. You end up having those skeletal orientations and you don't see them. You might even believe, oh my God, I am not like my family. Yeah, and it may be true, you may not be, but you have a skeletal orientation in there. It's been constructed over much time, especially in the early years. Understanding that about yourself and realizing that it's okay, but it's not necessarily an optimum positional thing when we think of ourselves as an individual. We are many facets of many people or conglomerate. And learn how to respect that the best you can. You're not perfect. So, in this hugely important thing, the act of focusing on that love or that energy, because I called it that, it's if a person is angry, for example, as an example, may not be related to this particular question. Annoyed is not angry. But if you're angry, chances are that structure has been cultivated within you for the purpose of protecting the form that you believe is valuable. But it closes down your ability to hear and to engage with respect to another person in a manner that would be more open. And this is natural because it's part of the defensive systems of almost everyone on the planet. It's not that it's bad versus good, it's that it's there in everybody. And sometimes not that subtle. But there are certain stimulations that can occur that cause this response. And they are normally caused by a discomfort in you. And if you see yourself as angry, you could ask yourself, and you could focus on that energy if you actually think you have that flow in you. So only take a second to do that. But when you're angry, that love will come in to help you be angry so you can see it, so you can understand that it's not really that helpful. But remember, you have a counteroffer. You have been trained to think that you, when you are angry, are valuable. When you do this, when you do that, when you do this and another that, you are valuable unto the schema that you and your family have constructed. These things are not so simple to talk about, and they're certainly not so simple to understand sometimes, because most of us would like to say, well, this personality that I have is the best I've got. Yeah, today, best you've got. It's okay if you shift something tomorrow, but do it because you saw something. And if someone approached you the way you're acting, you would not be comfortable with that. Don't do it because it's bad versus good or good versus bad. It doesn't help you much. You hide then, and you utilize, you use. It's utility. You use something that is work for you. Eh? That's different than you being capable of using your intelligence. And you are intelligent. This is a self-promotion. Loving overtly and everybody likes you is a self-promotion. You may like that one better. You might not, because that may not be the structure that is promoted as the one that should be used, because it validates from generation to generation to generation to generation. It's hard to see these things, but in no case does it mean you're a bad person, or others are either. We would like to believe that we can reason and help another. I'd just like to give you an idea that you probably already know. We are interpreters of energy coming in our direction. Our interpretation is, as a matter of fact, often inappropriate. We don't have enough information to truly interpret something. But it doesn't stop us from interpreting. We're interpreters. Somewhere between the perception of flow coming into us, including our ears and what we're hearing, including our eyes and what we're seeing, including our gut response, people would say, or if that solar plexus is really quite strong, what you think others are engaging with because of how you're feeling. And remember, your feel sense has been constructed from your past and how your structural family background is, and your interpretations will do the same thing. Leave room for a deeper level of understanding. Just leave room for it. Meaning, you'll not always figure it out, whether it be you or whether it be others. If you start talking to yourself about the fact that you're figuring it out all the time, your chances of figuring things out in a real way are less and less. Unless you follow a cage, a structure, and you follow that structure, and if it doesn't fit the structure, it's not good. If it does fit the structure, it's good. And this is what we do. And when you follow that structure, from your perspective, it'll be valid or invalid. The optimum human being does not exist. Meaning, as a personality, there's no perfect constructed personality. We are figments of our imagination. And without that imagination, we would not be able to be continually creative in our lives, continually open to broadening our relationship with existence. This is not only true individually, but true for humanity, whether you be a philosopher or a scientist, whether you engage with others on a very coarse level, which is part of our fundamental engagement with life, or middling level, or very high level. Our imagination constructs a formula, and that formula is there for us to be comforted by. Seldom do we reach the point where we say, oh, I'm comforting myself. Okay, let me soften down here a little bit. Okay, I'm softening down. Uh, oh, yeah, okay, that's my personality. Okay, I got that. Oh, and that's theirs. And that's what. So they don't know that they're in the middle of their flow of force, in the middle of that form. They don't know that. You don't know that unless you start to notice it. Even then, it's the early days. And we still use constructed notations about what is valid, what's invalid, what's right, what's wrong. Um, no, no negation. Just looking at my watch. I don't want to go over time. Um, no negation is involved with this. When you're looking at another individual, you have to realize that that other individual, whether they believe they know themselves or not, do not know themselves. What you see, you may think you can help. I'm a great believer in subtlety. Sometimes I'm really wrong with that. I can be subtly helping. And some people I know will say, don't be subtle. Tell me right out, damn it. And I've even bitten on that and found it not a good idea. I've even bitten when I was thinking about myself and haven't found it a good idea because of the reflex we have inside to internally protect against being put in a position that is lesser. And we're all in lesser positions daily, but we're all wondrously engaging and broadening daily. So, therefore, lesser is part of the movement that we're involved with. It feels less comfortable, that's for sure. But it allows us to be okay with continually growing. I believe that that in itself is an act of love to be able to be okay with continually growing. I had a what I would call a reasonable friend at one point who said that he had grown to the best of his ability. And I was pretty able guy. And I said, wow, are you ready to quit? And he said, are you? I said, oh no, I got a long way to go. He said, yeah, I think maybe I do too. Being a human being and knowing it is a lot better than thinking you're something that relates to a structure or a codex, some formula that you believe you've already reached an apex in. All of us are learning. All of us sometimes believe that we have reached a kind of place within us that proves that we're able. There's no such place. It's all related directly to the construct. Strangely enough, even a family construct over generations. Amazing. But if it's normal for us, then it's okay if we recognize it. I put more emphasis when I'm talking on an energetic helping than I do on a personality helping. I do that simply because that those higher states can help through us in a way that is even yet unimaginable by us. And we have good imaginations, but an energy coming in through a system that's like a filter that includes good things, not so good things, excellences, uh, early days, and various types of things. Oh God, that we protect fairly well. Energy comes in, gets involved with that area where you've been able to help yourself better, or made some adjustments that you think are valuable and are uses some of that flotsam and jetsam that you had in there that you originally thought was really good, uses that, goes forward into someone else, as I said before, and touches them in an area where they're hooked and they can't move because they've fallen in love with the way of being. If you try to help them there, you're going to give a rendering of what you believe it's the problem is, but you don't know what the problem is. You may think you do. And as a matter of fact, sometimes you get pretty darn close. Sometimes it's like being in two different cities. But in that moment, that love or that energy touches them in a way that helps them be helped like you were helped, and you never know it. But they, within them, engage with life and begin to move slightly different than they did before in certain places in their relationship with life. You never know. They have been helped through you, by you helping you. Not being perfect, just being a human being, knowing that's what you are, and caring enough to want to help. Sometimes not even knowing what to do. I think that'll be it for this evening. And thank you, Sonia, for your question is wondrous. Thank you. More about that, if anyone wants more about that. And it is a fundamentally important way of understanding that flow, because it uses everything to be helpful in a loving orientation. A loving orientation is helping you where you are, not where you think you are. This is very disturbing. We don't like it that way. We'd like to have it a different way. I wish you all well. Take care. And we're going to meditate for a little while. Good night. Now we'll just begin to do the balancing and grounding on our own. Good evening. Have a good evening.